Moving on to the 10-mark question. With reference to the last paragraph in extract C, so very specific, so it's referring to this, assess the impact of a fall in real incomes on subjective happiness. Okay, so this is a bit of a different type of question. It's a bit more of a wishy-washy question, I'd say, especially with anything related to like subjective happiness. Of course, there are going to be quite a few different approaches in answering this question. But let's have a read of this last extract, this last paragraph of extract C, which is Bank of England tells lenders to increase capital reserves. But let's have a read of the last paragraph. Analysts are concerned about the impact on consumer confidence of rising inflation, partly caused by the falling pound. With falling real incomes, consumers could become more vulnerable to falling behind on their credit card and personal loan repayments. Despite these concerns, the UK economy has recently recorded the lowest rates of unemployment since 1975. So that looks like a good, decent evaluation point there. But the question is basically asking us, when real incomes fall, what is the effect on subjective happiness? So the way I'm going to get started is just by defining what a fall in real incomes is. So essentially what is when people's wages are rising slower than the increase in prices, the increase in price level. And what does this mean for people? It therefore means people would suffer from. This leads to decreased purchasing power. Well, now, with regards to the actual main paragraph point, your main paragraph point could be something like, yes, they're able to demand less goods and services, therefore they're not as happy. But I want to use the extract a bit more and focus a bit more on the extract, since there's not really much to say here. And the extract, the last paragraph, is very much to do with loans and to do with borrowing. So I'm going to focus it on that. It means individuals are going to struggle to pay off their loans. Basically, they're more vulnerable to debt. And what example can we give is fixed rate debt, that they're more vulnerable to. Why? Since their incomes are falling, but the interest rates on their debt, on their loans, is staying exactly the same. Therefore, they're making less in real terms, but their debts are staying the same. Therefore, it's harder for them to pay off that debt. And that is what I'm going to focus on. Then I'm going to go into the chain of analysis. Therefore, relatively, they're paying more off in debt, therefore leading to less money for other goods and services, leading to a decrease in subjective happiness. Yes, of course, remember, use the extract as much as possible. But then we're going to specify especially things like fixed rate interest. So, for example, some mortgages are fixed rate interest. I'm going to continue with saying, therefore, with the lower relative incomes, it makes it harder to pay these debts back. And therefore, it's harder to pay these debts back. They have less money for other things. They have less money to spend on other goods and services. And then continue on from there. So the way I've concluded it is, so less incomes to spend on other goods and services that contribute to individuals' happiness, e.g. like a car, a new holiday. And utility itself kind of means happiness, but it's a really good way to conclude it. This definitely, I understand why students find this a difficult question, because it's a weird question. There's not much content knowledge being assessed here. You really have to try to elongate these chains of analysis, extract as much information as possible to try and pick up these marks here. And of course, making sure you're including the application to pick up the application marks here. But yeah, a bit of a weird, bit of a tricky question for a 10-mark question. But now let's move on to the evaluation, as of course there will be 4 marks here for evaluation. Okay, so that's how to write that first evaluation point. So like I said, high income households, high level of saving, reduction in income will not affect the ability to demand goods and services. Low income households are the opposite. They have little to no savings, so disproportionately affect their ability to demand goods and services. But anyway, another evaluation point to think about after reading the extract is, of course, it mentions that the levels of employment have recorded the lowest rates of employment since 1975. So 100%, really good real world application. Combined with evaluation, that's a lot of marks there. So I'm going to make sure to include that. The way I'm going to include that is saying, however, in evaluation, this depends on real incomes being the only factor that decides subjective happiness. As you can say, things like job security, things like health, well-being, also affect individuals' subjective happiness, and then you can quote in e.g. This is the lowest rates of unemployment since 1975 for the UK, thus meaning subjective happiness may not actually decrease, as things like the population's health might be good, or there's high levels of employment in the population, therefore meaning people may actually be happy. People's subjective happiness may actually be increasing rather than decreasing. But yeah, that's how I tackle this 10-mark question. Like I said, it's a slightly weird one, but it's really good practice. So if anything like this on subjective happiness comes up, you know how to tackle it. This is the beauty of doing past papers, so you're prepared for any sort of scenario within the exam. So whatever they throw at you, you know how to tackle it. And this is why I emphasize past papers, and it's definitely the most consistent strategy to get A stars. If you can, as a student, complete every single past paper for your exam board, you are putting yourself in the driver's seat to get the A star, as you know exactly, you've pretty much been through every single question the exam board can assess and every single variation they can assess. So if you do the papers correctly, you improve from the paper. There's hardly any scenarios where the exam board can throw at you that you'll be confused, that you haven't encountered before. And this is why we are able to get such consistent A stars at UW Econ, and we get some of the highest scorers each year, because I really emphasize, and the tutors really emphasize, to do as many past papers as possible, improve on the past papers, work on your exam technique. But yeah, that is the 10 mark question done, and let's keep going to the next question, which will be the 12 mark question.